Sri Aurobindo then says beautifully in Thoughts and Glimpses, when we have passed beyond enjoyings, then we shall have bliss. Desire was the helper, desire is the bar. When we are incomplete human beings, we have objects of desire to reach out for. And when that object of desire is gained, we have a moment of happiness. And that at least gives us some respite from the constant undertone of unhappiness we live with. So, when we are spiritual infants, desire is the helper. It at least helps us to live and snatch some moments of pleasure from life. But as we grow spiritually, desire becomes the bar. Because Mother says it very beautifully that the vibration of Ananda and pleasure cannot coexist. When you fulfill a desire, you get pleasure, momentary pleasure. But Ananda comes from your being. Ananda is part of the gold treasure trove you're sitting on. So every time a desire is fulfilled, the ego is happy. The ego comes forward. Remember, whenever your ego comes forward, your self will retreat. The self with a capital S. And whenever the self comes forward, necessarily the ego retreats. Whenever the self comes forward, there's a natural feeling of joy and Ananda, which has nothing to do with satisfying or fulfilling desires. So spiritual maturity comes in moving the axis of your happiness from pleasure of fulfilling desires to Ananda of your essential self. So Sri Aurobindo's words from Synthesis of Yoga: a really perfect enjoyment of existence can only come when what we enjoy is not the world in itself or for itself, but God in the world. When it is not things, but the Ananda of the spirit in things that forms the real, essential object of our enjoying, and things only as a form and symbol of the spirit, waves of the ocean of Ananda. So he's saying a very beautiful thing. The real perfect enjoyment of existence comes not when we enjoy objects for themselves, but when we enjoy the God essence in them. Now, how do we do that? We do that when the God essence in things becomes visible to us. Now, when we are in nature, this happens very naturally, right? Because the God essence in a flower or a leaf is much more visible even to a very clouded consciousness than the God essence in this wood or in my spectacles, for instance. But when I'm in nature, what I'm really enjoying is not just the leaves and the trees and the flowers, but the essence that's emanating through them, isn't it? That's why our sages loved to meditate in forests, because it was so easy to connect to God in nature, isn't it? Now, a more enlightened consciousness slowly starts feeling this God essence in everything. So wherever such an enlightened consciousness goes, it feels the presence of God in that object and it enjoys that. Vedanta calls it the rasanubhuti, the juice of God essence in each thing which is being enjoyed. So Sadhguru shares a very beautiful story about his grandmother. He had a very different and strange grandmother. She said she never did worship in a usual way. She loved God to death, but she would often get flowers and playfully with her feet kick the flowers onto the idol. Nothing was blasphemous for her. It was her way of worshipping. And she would, out of her food, large portion of it she would put on the window for the crows, for the ants on the ground. And she would say when the ants would come and eat the food, she would be crying in ecstasy. Because to her vision, the ants were also God, and it gave her so much joy to see the ants coming and eating the food. So it's about developing that vision where we just see God and feel God everywhere. How do we start with this? Well, it can start with our mind. The Gita says, no, yoya shraddha sa eva sa. Whatever is your faith will become your truth. So to constantly remember that this floor is also God, the cushion is God, this person is God, and to constantly remember that. And if you have enough love for God, just to remember that prarthana, that mother is in prarthana, that's not prarthana sitting there, that's sakshatkar mother. Looking at prarthana, I can feel joy if I love mother enough, isn't it? So it has to be something living. Then if everything is the field of God for me, then I'm happy wherever I am. And that's what we see in Sri Aurobindo's life, right? He was under the worst circumstances in jail, but the most joyful time in his life till that moment. Of course, later on in his sadhana, who knows what he experienced, none of us can comment on it. But till that moment in jail, the most joyful time was in jail, when his inner vision opened up and he just saw Krishna in everything. So that's when he experienced Ananda, and that Ananda was so big that though none of his physical requirements were fulfilled in jail, he was just unconditionally happy.